I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. As we have a special program today, our speaker had some technical difficulties, so I thought that what I would do is give people an update on what's happening in my life and where I'm going with my creative energies, because there's been some very fundamental changes that I think our Humanity Rising community needs to know about. Over the last year and a half, I would say, since August of 2023, I have been in Washington, D.C., as you all know, working as the director of the Washington office of the New Paradigm Institute and throwing myself into the UAP disclosure fray as it's been developing in the corridors of power in the White House and the House of Representatives and the Senate. It's been an exhilarating ride, and I have enjoyed every minute of it, working principally with Danny Sheehan and Katie Amrin, who's the chief operating officer at Ubiquity University. But because she's so enthusiastic about the issue, she added to her responsibilities and served as director of operations for the New Paradigm Institute in our DC office. We built training programs, the ET Studies program in partnership between Ubiquity and the New Paradigm Institute. We built Citizens for Disclosure, which was the first time ever in the entire history where a citizens activist network around the UFO issue and disclosure issue was mobilized. And really want to acknowledge Katie Amrin's extraordinary prowess. Within a year, we had set up organizations in all 50 states and in 33 countries. We had a disclosure diplomacy network of groups around the world that were working for government disclosure in their respective countries. We had an experiencer network that was headed up by Linda White, one of our graduate students, for those people indicating that they'd had some kind of ET experience and wanted to share this with other experiencers. We developed a major project among the world religions. We were coordinating with many organizations around what was happening in Washington, D.C. So it was a very full time. And I was going 24/7, 365, and really established, I think, a global network around UAP disclosure. And then in October, something very unusual happened. I was contacted by a very old friend of mine who's been on Humanity Rising a number of times. Many of you know her, Lynn Twist. She's the co-founder with her husband, Bill Twist, of the Pachamama Alliance, which works in extraordinary ways down in the Amazon to protect the Amazonian basin. And she had a deep meditation and was given this message. As she reported it to me, you got to tell Jim Garrison that he needs to recreate the State of the World Forum. So we had a call. We had subsequent exchanges of emails, and it has transpired that this idea, this me of recreating the State of the World Forum is now taking shape in wonderful ways. And so it was because of the importance of the State of the World Forum 2.0 that Katie and I made the decision to leave the New Paradigm Institute, to return full time to Ubiquity University, where I am president. And as I mentioned, she's the chief operating officer, and to focus our attention on Humanity Rising, which will be the container for this new State of the World Forum. So many of you are probably asking, so what on earth is the State of the World Forum? So let me just tell the following story, which is a major chapter in my life. It's something that I look back on as a transformational moment where it was like all the trains coming into the station at once and leaving the stations at once. It was an extraordinary moment in history, and for myself and a number of people who were partners with me in that moment, including Lynn and Bill Twist. You may all remember that when I did my PhD at Cambridge University, I took as my doctoral dissertation topic the question of why it is that after billions of years of evolutionary life, our species in our generation has brought the entire life process to the brink of extinction. At that time, in the late 1970s and early 80s, when I was doing my dissertation, due principally to the threat of thermonuclear war. When I would talk to people about the nuclear danger, the universal response I was given was, of course, we need to have nuclear weapons because the Russians are so evil and so totalitarian. The Russians at that time were in their Soviet period. And so, curious, I went to Russia in the fall of 1982 and spent 2.5 months traveling all over the Soviet Union, having an amazing experience, at the conclusion of which I had an insight that changed my life forever. And that is, we don't need nuclear weapons because the Russians are so bad. We need an enemy in the Russians to justify our military-industrial complex and our nuclear weapons. And once I understood that, I actually wrote a book about it with co-author Pyari Shipuri called The Russian Threat, Myths and Realities. And I began to commit myself, if the Russian threat is the problem, we've got to establish all kinds of relationships with the Russians, working with the US government, working with the Russian government to make sure we don't blow ourselves up with the very fundamental assertion it is possible for human beings, whatever their culture, whatever their race, whatever their wealth index, who they are, wherever they are, it's possible for human beings to get along. We don't have to be threatening planetary existence with thermonuclear war just because we don't like somebody. And so between really, 1982 to 1990, 91, and the collapse of the Soviet Union in December of 1991. I spent my time crisscrossing Europe and the United States, setting up all kinds of projects. I worked as the executive director of the Esalen Institute, their Soviet American exchange program, with my very good friend and colleague, Jim Hickman, also with Harriet Crosby, another dear friend who established an organization called the Institute for Soviet American Relations. She knew the ambassador there in Moscow, Ambassador Hartman, and we were in one of those extraordinary moments of history where citizen diplomacy played a significant role at a crucial moment when the Cold War was coming to an end, the Soviet Union was collapsing, and Moscow was the epicenter of human affairs under the aegis of Mikhail Gorbachev, who came into office in March of 1985 and left office on December 24th, 1991. And during that period, Moscow and the Soviet Union and Mikhail Gorbachev was the historical mandate. And just like it was when Mandela got out of prison in South Africa, all the attention went to South Africa. And for a few brief shining moments, human possibility, human nobility burst forth to illuminate human consciousness. I had the privilege of meeting Mr. Gorbachev. I was, in fact, the last foreigner that he received in his Kremlin office in December of 1991, before he resigned. I met him again in January of 1992 at his request. It was during that meeting in January 1992 that I proposed to him, because his resignation had come quickly and he wasn't sure what to do. And I said, well, in the States, they do these presidential centers. You ought to consider a presidential library. And also establishing Gorbachev foundations around the world, because you are loved. You are respected. And I am sure that I would be willing to set something up back in the United States. And that's exactly what happened. He said this was a great idea. So I went back to the States and coordinated with Ronald Reagan and George Shultz, who was Secretary of State with President Reagan. This was obviously after President Reagan had finished his 2 terms, and he was out in California establishing his presidential library. And it turned out that in May of 1992, Ronald Reagan was opening his presidential library. So I arranged for Mikhail Gorbachev to come to the Reagan Library for the inaugural event of Reagan's library, which was an incredible moment. Then we traveled all over the United States, and it was like traveling with the Beatles. Mobbed. Everybody wanted to even just touch him. Those of you who remember the Gorbachev days, it was an extraordinary moment in time. As our relationship matured, I proposed to Mr. Gorbachev that we convene what I had called the State of the World Forum. We were at the end of the Cold War. There was this sense that if we just got it together, we could have a peace dividend. So we thought, why don't we gather people from all over the world and across every conceivable discipline? Nobel laureates, heads of state, grassroots organizers from South India, scientists, business executives, anyone who is seeking the illumination of humanity so that we can ensure that the Cold War demarcates a flowering, a renaissance of the human spirit. So between 1995 and the year 2000, every fall, starting in San Francisco at the Fairmont Hotel, which was celebrating its 50th anniversary at that time, 1945 to 1995. It was in the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco where the United Nations was agreed to and convened. So we went to the Fairmont Hotel, and Mr. Gorbachev and Raisa Gorbachev stayed in the penthouse suite where they met. So it was one of these incredible synchronicities of history. And it was just an amazing, man. It was like your hair was on fire all the time because you knew this was real. This was happening in time, hopefully to change time. In 2000, we designed it so it was happening coterminous with the United Nations Millennium Summit of Heads of State, which drew the greatest number of heads of state in the history of the world to New York City. We took over the New York Hilton, Midtown, and we had a 7-day event that had 320 sub-events. We had heads of state coming over. We had Colin Powell. We had I can't even remember all the people that came, but the good and the beautiful assembled in New York, and we just went supernova. And then 9/11 happened. And I knew immediately that it was over, that no possibility any longer existed for elegant politics. So I flew to Moscow. Gorbachev and I had lunch, toasted, some vodka, and agreed it had been a good run. And it was one of the best runs of my life. I treasure those moments deeply. As part of the reason why I am here. We're all brought into this world for a reason. And our task is to find it. When I wrote my PhD dissertation and I really pondered the question of why is it that our species in our generation are bringing the entire process to the brink of extinction, that changed my life forever. I've never been the same since. And I've dedicated myself to trying to do what this insignificant man can do to bring forth the charism of the spirit that can convene a critical mass of consciousness and collaborative activism to ensure the continuity of our kind. And I've never looked back. And after the Gorbachev moment, after 2001, I worked actually with George Soros for a while on globalization issues, and then I was brought into what is now Ubiquity University, which has been a real love, I would say, at the same level as what I did with Gorbachev, the possibility of enabling people to go deep, to go far. A university that's designed for 13s in a 12 world, that is breaking the boundaries of epistemology and ontology and phenomenology in our world. Willing to ask the big questions, like establishing the first ever extraterrestrial studies program, so we can begin to develop master's and PhD dissertations on this phenomenon. The disclosure event is upon us. And you can watch, the news and so forth and so on, but humanity needs to stop, pause, and take in the enormity of this moment. We're being visited by civilizations far more advanced than we are. We need to rise to this occasion and use this occasion and the crises that we're in for the transformation and enlargement of the human soul. After 20 years or so at Ubiquity, I'm now much farther down the road, and find myself in the epicenter of UAP disclosure, and all of a sudden the opportunity to recreate the State of the World Forum has been thrust into my life, quite literally from the other side. And just like I knew instantly when Danny Sheehan called me up in August of 2023 and said, "Hey, Jim, I've been wanting to establish the New Paradigm Institute to work on disclosure for 20 years. And I feel it's time, and you're the one I want to help. I want to work with to establish the New Paradigm Institute." And instantly I said yes, and within 30 days, I was in Washington, D.C. And when Lynn broached the State of the World Forum, I knew instantly that it was the correct next step. And life has been unfolding from there. Just imagine the following. This is so delectable. Lynn's basic point was, when we talked, that the period now, 2025 to 2030, is just like 1995 to 2000. It's a potentiated moment, a highly energized moment where crises have brought us to the brink of extinction. But solutions are lying all around us. And what we need is a catalytic experience that can provide humanity with a new narrative. The popular perception, the zeitgeist, as it were, back in the 1990s was one of optimism at the end of the Cold War. Remember the peace dividend? Didn't happen because of 9/11 and the neocons and various other exigencies. But there was a euphoria when the Berlin Wall came down, when Gorbachev withdrew Soviet forces from Eastern Europe, when the Americans said that they would not move NATO an inch to the east, when Gorbachev and Reagan and Gorbachev and Thatcher and Bush and Kohl were meeting together in summits on a regular basis, and everyone knew, as Gorbachev said, a global civilization is now possible. It was perverted, that moment, principally by the neocons, who instead of seizing the moment to create peace, seized the moment to establish full spectrum dominance by the United States over the rest of the world. That's what's led eventually to the war in Ukraine, because the United States began to move NATO to the east with a view of overcoming Russia, breaking Russia up, dominating China. And so this next 5 years is going to be like no other period, because back in the 1990s, we weren't close to extinction. And now climate change is spun out of control. Artificial intelligence is unleashed. Geostrategic rivalries are breaking up the global infrastructure. Human health, both at a physical level and a mental level and a psychological level and an emotional level, is in tattered. 60% of the youth from all over the world believe that we're doomed. Adults, particularly the elderly, tend to agree. And no one can connect the dots anymore. No one understands what's going on. And a sense of powerlessness, a sense of despair is beginning to grip the human psyche. And that's the starting point of State of the World Forum 2.0, because I believe that there is a meaning framework that can contain all the diversity that right now is ripping the world asunder. Because the challenge now, as we literally teeter on the brink, is how do we somehow enable the transition for humanity between the mentality of human superiority and dominance over each other and the larger planetary ecology into a worldview and mentality of sacred reciprocity with the rest of creation. That's what we have to midwife. The one thing that can serve as a catalyst, the irritant in the oyster that can bring forth the pearl, is the arrival of the extraterrestrials on Earth. Because humanity now is in its second Copernican revolution. The first one was to establish scientifically that the Earth and the sun were not the center of the universe. But even with that first revolution, we still clung to this illusion that we are still in charge. We're the apex here, ladies and gentlemen. And now these UFOs are descending, like we've seen with the drones over the last several months. They're flying with complete impunity over weapons facilities, over air bases, over any part of the world. And all the king's horses and all the king's men cannot take those orbs out of the sky and put Humpty Dumpty back together again. The ETs are here. There's zero doubt. We are not alone. And the implications of this reality is going to change everything. So, Forum 2.0 for the first time ever, is going to bring together the code red issues of our time with the ET moment. Think about that over a 5-year period, 6-year period between 2025 and the year 2030. So that right as we're going into our crisis of crises, we're also catalyzing a world conversation. How does humanity solve these problems? We need a new story. That's why the ETs are here. And the container for the whole thing, including the ETs, is indigenous wisdom. The elders from the earthlands, the peoples who've been the victims of modernity, but have never betrayed their alignment and their synergy with the mother. They are the only ones amongst us, my friends, who remember the Ariadne thread back to the primordial. So just imagine a series of conferences presided over by the original peoples, where the creme de la creme of humanity is brought together to ponder deeply the issues that are challenging human survival. And the catalytic ingredient, the irritant in the oyster, is our cosmic moment and the arrival of the ETs on Earth in an incontrovertible way. This is what I'm being called to do with a growing group of people. It's what Ubiquity University is now dedicating itself to fostering. It's what Humanity Rising is going to be developing. Humanity Rising, if you think about it, has been like a state-of-the-world forum, but rather than all at once over 5 or 7 days, it's every day, Monday through Friday, overtime. We have talked about every conceivable human issue. There's nothing that's outside of Humanity Rising by design. Because in my view, as the convener, the more we break through the boundaries of the limitations of mind and psyche, the more we live in the questions at every level, the more that elixir of spirit can work into our hearts and souls and bring an enlargement so that ultimately we can hold the polarities that are currently ripping our world asunder. We can hold them together in a dialectical tension, the energy of which transforms consciousness. That's the task of our time. That's the challenge of every single one of us, is to break through the boundaries, to transgress the wisdom of limits in this moment, embrace our cosmic identity, learn the mother tongue, develop the facility, the faculty of engaging in intelligible communication with extraterrestrials, with our pets, with the trees, in our gardens, with the flower in our vases. All is conscious. All is sentient. All is interwoven in Indra's net of compassionate interactivity, supported by the Akashic field, drawing from the memory of the cosmos to help shape the next moment as something better than the last, and out of which we humans can finally, at long last, squeeze the slave out of ourselves. And to do justice. And to walk humbly with each other and with all life. It is to this purpose that I'm now dedicating my life. And I wanted you all to know about it because that's what I think is now in store for this extraordinary community of Humanity Rising that has nurtured me in very deep ways for many years. That has produced friendships, depth, have challenged me to keep learning and to stay open and to continue to ponder what we must do at this time to deserve the adulation of our children under the 7th generation. Thank you, everyone. This will bring our session today to a close. And I will be back tomorrow, and we will continue our dialogue about what we can do to enable humanity to rise.